Hello, and welcome to the Sustainability Leaders Podcast, part of the Jobs with Impact compendium of resources for people who want to make a positive impact on the world. I'm David Rosenheim, your host. Every week, we bring you in-depth conversations with people who are leading the way to a sustainable future. I hope these conversations will be as inspiring to you as they are to me, and most of all, I hope that they'll empower you to take action. The planet needs you. You can learn more about this and other episodes by going to jobswithimpact.com. This episode is part of the California Leadership Series, where we focus on changemakers in California government who are shaping the most innovative energy and climate policy anywhere, transforming the world's fifth largest economy and beyond. Our sustainable business sponsor for the California Leadership Series is Lyft. Lyft is the fastest growing rideshare company in the U.S. and is available to 95% of the U.S. population. Lyft is preferred by drivers and passengers for its reliable and friendly experience and its commitment to effecting positive change for the future of our cities as the first rideshare company to launch a carbon offset program. And now, all Lyft rides are carbon neutral. To learn more, visit lyft.com/carbon. California State Senator Fran Pavley is widely considered to be the mother of California climate policy. From her humble beginnings teaching 8th grade civics for 29 years and as mayor of Agoura Hills, which is just north of Los Angeles, she burst onto the state political scene in 2000 as an Assemblymember and then served from 2008 to 2016 as a senator. With early training in environmental planning, she quickly became the tip of the spear of environmental legislation in California, authoring bills that changed the shape of transportation policy in the nation and climate policy across the globe. Among her many wins, Pavley authored Assembly Bill 1493 in 2002, also known as the Clean Cars Bill or the Pavley Law, which requires greenhouse gas reduction from vehicle tailpipes. 8 years later, President Obama rolled out national clean car standards, which were modeled on the Pavley Bill, standards which Trump is threatening to roll back. And this is really important, folks. Under Trump's recent proposal, automakers would only have to produce cars that achieve 29 miles per gallon by 2025. And this is a major change. The Obama standards required that new cars average 43 miles per gallon by 2025. Even worse, the EPA has also said it will revoke California's waiver to operate its zero-emissions vehicle program. Since the passage of the Clean Air Act in 1970, no president has ever denied or revoked California's waiver to regulate conventional air pollution until now. California, along with 16 other states representing almost half of the American population, are fighting back, suing the federal government for noncompliance with the Clean Air Act. Back to Pavley. The good senator went on to author the 2006 Global Warming Solutions Act, or AB 32, which was the first law in California to mandate an economy-wide reduction of greenhouse gases. And just as she had to fight the oil and auto industry to pass the Clean Cars rule, Pavley was up against oil and gas, utilities, manufacturing, and other major emitters to pass this critical first step in capping California emissions. The resulting scoping plan that was drafted by the Air Resources Board created, among several strategies, a cap-and-trade program that is serving now as a model for states and countries around the world from Quebec to China. Rounding out her climate policy trifecta was the 2016 update to AB 32, SB 32, which built on California's success in curbing emissions while simultaneously achieving significant economic growth, which is something the skeptics thought impossible. Senator Pavley sat down with me a few weeks ago while she was in San Francisco for the Global Climate Action Summit. We covered everything from 8th grade education, which is a subject near to my heart since I have an 8th grader and another in 6th grade, to her entrance to Sacramento as a total outsider in 2000, to her being honored in the Rose Garden by President Obama for her world-changing, fearless work to combat climate change. Senator Fran Pavley, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Welcome to San Francisco. Glad you're here for the Global Climate Action Summit.
It's great to have it right in our own state.
It is. We don't have to go to Poland or to Peru or anywhere else. I guess you and I were last together in Paris.
I was in Paris, and I remember being very cold in Copenhagen of 2009 and been to Montreal. So I've been around, and so reducing my carbon footprint coming to San Francisco makes a lot of sense.
Indeed. So I'd love to start sort of at the beginning and learn a little bit about your childhood and sort of where you come from. I know you're a native Angelino or from Sherman Oaks, more specifically. What was it like growing up there?
Well, this is quite a few years ago, and Los Angeles doesn't look quite like it does today. The missed opportunities in urban planning struck me later on when I got my master's degree in planning that we never did this right. But I grew up in Sherman Oaks as part of the San Fernando Valley, and geographically it's sort of a valley in between mountain ranges. And smog was the number one topic back then in the 50s and 60s. Most days you couldn't even see the mountains that were fairly tall, just a few miles away. I remember as a young child going through elementary school, especially, you couldn't go outside many days. There would be a red flag up at your school, red flag alert days. The air was so bad. So this was sort of the beginning of public involvement in clean air policies, and there was a lot of pressure on people to do something. Mm-hmm. And this is back when we didn't have that many cars, right? We didn't have that many trucks, but we didn't have unleaded gas, or we were operating on diesel, and the list goes on and on. So Governor Reagan actually became governor, and he was from the Los Angeles area with all these suburban housewives clamoring to do something. And this certainly wasn't a partisan issue. It never occurred to him. But he created, when he became governor, sort of the predecessor for the Air Resources Board.
And what was sort of was it the air itself, or were there other sort of things that contributed to your environmentalism?
Outdoor person my whole life. I'd rather be outdoors than indoors. I'm also family vacations or weekends at the beach or camping and things like that. I ended up eventually after college moving to Agoura Hills, which was Agoura at the time. It's a small community nestled in the Santa Monica Mountains, far away from the wild chaos in Los Angeles. I was on the Coastal Commission. I was on the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy and the Resource Conservation Board, double timing with being a middle school teacher, where I taught mostly 8th grade American history, but took 6th graders to an outdoor education camp every year for 15 years. And still today, when I run into those former students, their experience they remember the most, outdoor education.
Yeah.
So
I have a 6th and 8th grader myself, and outdoor ed was it was actually in 5th grade for my now 8th grader, and it was a huge deal for him.
For many kids, and I taught in this little town called, Esparta when I was in Northern California, and then Moore Park down in Ventura County. It was their first time away from home, but also the first time being outside and trying to explain to parents that it would be safe. And why would they let their daughter, perhaps, go spend a week looking at rocks and snakes and things like that and the stars at night? So I've always had an environmental priority in my personal life.
And did you study it as an undergrad? I know you went on to do a master's in environmental planning.
Interesting enough, this was during the turbulent 60s. I was thinking of Santa Barbara, going to university there, that the students just blew up the Bank of America. I mean, there were protests everywhere. Even on my high school campus, kids were out with guitar. Everything was... So my parents were relatively protective, a conservative Republican father, non-political kinds of parents. So the quiet place, and my mother had a friend whose daughter went there. I went to Fresno State. And there weren't that many kids from LA at Fresno State, but there was something in common with that old San Fernando Valley days, air pollution.
Right.
And so I have an interesting background in that when people talk to me, I get the Central Valley. I understand it very well. In fact, I was interviewed yesterday at a forum when the reporter from Fresno came running up because I happened to mention Fresno State in all this discussion. And I think that's very helpful because some of the more rural communities are actually facing a disproportionate share of the climate change, and they don't have the political will on the local level, let alone most of the representatives on the state level, to really step up and do something about it. So it's all about public health, number one. And so that background, the middle class background of the 50s and 60s is sort of my upbringing.
And what was the impetus to study environmental planning, and what was the content of that course of study at Northridge, I believe, right?
It was at Cal State Northridge. I was teaching during the day, and it was a nighttime program where you could take several classes a semester. It takes several years to get through all those units, but also do some intern work for units during the summer. So I worked for the National Park Service and others on planning, and the Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area was just formed. Had to map major and minor subdivisions, and it was in the days before computers, so you literally had to go downtown and through paper file folders find CUPs and other planning documents to find out if a project was ever approved or built on. It was amazing. You had to physically go through paperwork.
Actual legwork.
And find out CUPs had expired. So that was the beginning, and now we have several 100,000 acres in the Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area.
And that's been claimed over time, gradually?
Yes, and I've been very, very involved in acquisition of those properties. And as luck would have it, chairing natural resources in the water committee, everything I've done is sort of overlapped into that. I was the first mayor of Agoura Hills, being elected with the voice about sort of preserving the environment as well as allowing the city to develop in what we called smart growth strategies even back then.
And was this while you were still teaching, or did this come after?
Oh, all together at once. My husband's also a teacher, and teachers are two-income families, right? And so you teach. I would joke. I would teach middle school during the day, and I was the sponsor of the student council at middle school, to work with 8th graders during the day, and then adults at night at the city council level. Little cities, it's a part-time job, but I made it a 20-hour-a-week sort of volunteer job, if you will, but you can make a difference on the local level.
So you share something with Eduardo Garcia, and that he was also a first mayor of Coachella, and that sort of led to his path into politics. So you were a teacher in total for almost 30 years, right?
Right.
And what led, you mentioned the Coastal Commission, you were doing these things sort of on the side. What was it? Tell me about the Coastal Commission work and how you got involved in that.
I got involved in that because I think the Coastal Commission, this is in the mid-90s, Pete Wilson was governor, Pringle was the speaker at the time. It was sort of an 8-4 split, with people not making coastal protection and public access the number one priority. And I was also, as an elected official for LA, very involved with the LA County League of California Cities, 88 cities in LA County. Right. And there's spots on the Coastal Commission where you have to pick an elected official from certain areas. So this particular seat was for LA County and Orange County. If you can imagine, it's like 100 and something cities. And
I had what, a third of the population of the state? I
had applied for that. I don't live in the coastal zone. I live inland from the Santa Monica Mountains. And State Senator Bill Lockyer appointed me. I think they needed sort of an independent voice. And much to Senator Lockyer's credit, he not once interfered with any big issue coming before me on the Coastal Commission. This is the Hearst development or Bolsa Chica or the San Onofre nuclear power plant. Big, controversial, big money issues. No interference. One time he called me up and he said, "Why don't you come up and have lunch with me?" And I thought, here it goes. Because there were all sorts of stories about interference from your appointing authority.
Mm-hmm.
And our lunch was, he wanted to thank me for the great job I was doing. I thought,
oh, nice.
So I tell that Bill Lockyer story because I think that speaks volumes. So I've been, maybe I have a reputation for it, but allowed to be fairly independent because I'm not easily pressured.
So one of the things that we're trying to do on this podcast is talk about how people can pursue careers in sustainability. And one thing that I don't think is talked a lot about are appointments, right? Mm-hmm. There are appointments throughout the state, like the Coastal Commission, that are open to people to apply to and get involved in. Could you talk a little bit just about that process and maybe sort of what types of commissions there are out there?
Absolutely. I think you can get involved in things in a variety of ways. If you're fortunate enough to be, especially in a smaller city, maybe it's easier. You don't have to have a lot of money to run in a small city council or be on one of their commissions or boards or have a lot of connections compared to maybe like Los Angeles or San Francisco or things. So average people can do that. And so looking for local opportunities is probably number one. And deciding what you're passionate about in life. Some people plan their politically where they want to go without really thinking of why they want to be on these things. Yeah. So there's lots of opportunities right now, let's say in Southern California or statewide, regional water boards are really incredibly important, especially with the coming drought and the trying to comply with the Federal Clean Water Act, juggling smart land use planning and stormwater capture and reuse project, and the list goes on and on. There's openings all the time. A lot of times people don't know about those openings. Those kind of state level or higher jobs take some connections, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but there's got to be some maybe NGOs or some organizations or a city or something that's backing your appointment. Because you probably don't know. In many cases, I never knew the appointing authority. I didn't have a relationship with them. But timing is everything, and sometimes they needed, for example, when I was running, someone that had an environmental voice that could add some balance to the Coastal Commission and would be somewhat independent. I wasn't in the coastal zone, which turned out to be a plus. No pressure on protecting projects that were approved.
Vested interests.
No vested interests. Voters or council decisions or anything. So there are numerous opportunities on ways to get involved, and sometimes I never planned a trajectory into politics. I got involved in an issue, knock on the door, why don't you come do this, or those kinds of things. And average people can get in a position to really make a difference on these committees and commissions and maybe even get elected to office.
I might follow up with you after this because I want to link in the show notes to this episode to some of the resources that people can find out about what some of these commissions are. But I think the point that you make about maybe first perhaps volunteering for an NGO, for an environmental nonprofit that might then support your appointment or support your candidacy might be a good way in.
So if you're wanting to go on the Coastal Commission, how many coastal cleanup days have you been on in mid-September? If the answer is none, then maybe that's
right.
Just wanting to be on that. And the Coastal Commission is you make a lot of powerful people angry. You have to know that. It's exciting, important work.
Right.
But telling people no.
Right. And I want to talk more about some cases.
1,100 miles of coastline. People knew who I was when I was running for the Assembly. That was good news and bad news.
Right. So let's kind of segue into your work in the legislature and what was the impetus, I guess, for your first run for the Assembly?
I had been a local government official, but I termed myself out after 4 years. So I actually went 4 years with no elected office. And I couldn't stay on the Coastal Commission because I was the elected official slot.
Right.
And so still was on the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy Advisory Committee. But in life, sometimes timing is everything. And Tom Hayden, who had been our state senator, tells you what kind of district this was back then, but Tom Hayden all of a sudden decides he's not going to go back and run for his 2 years left in the Assembly in August of the year before the March election. So just, 7-8 months out, at last minute. And two of my friends, one who I was on the Coastal Commission with and someone else, had said to me, Fran, run. You should run. Well, I'm from a town of 20,000, and there was about 500,000 people in the Assembly district, and I looked at that map. Mm-hmm. If you can't count on 100 people you know who would maybe not donate money to you, because I didn't know those people, but would walk precincts, would help you get elected, and maybe they live in different spots of the area, you don't have a chance. So I was the grassroots candidate. Really didn't ever go to Sacramento. Didn't even occur to me. Who would I talk to up there? I didn't have those connections. But living in an area and perhaps focusing on issues you really care about and having enough people care about the same issues made the difference. So it turned out that teacher was a good name to have as a ballot designation.
And so did you run on an environmental platform, an education platform, sort of those two issues, or was it broader?
Two issues. I talk about sort of my life has been in the 3E category, education and the environment. And once I got to the legislature, we put in energy.
Right.
I'd like to say all three, though, tie in. This is my stump speech, of course, campaigning with the economy.
And so what was it like then, arriving in Sacramento, not having had really any background in state-level politics?
Well, I think the people in Sacramento didn't have any clue who I was. The Democratic Party was shocked. I have to say this was a time when the Democratic Party didn't interfere in primaries.
Okay.
I would not have won because I didn't have those connections. Even large women's groups on the West Side, they would ask me, "You've never come to our meetings." Well, they're at lunch on weekdays. I teach,
Right. Right.
I'm living the dream here. And so they were a little concerned when I pulled it off. Someone I was running against who had been head of the LADWP, widely known, but really didn't have a grassroots base in the district. The papers all thought someone else was going to win. So it always sort of mentioned, because I had the credentials, like President of the League of California Cities, all these things, ended up pulling it off, split votes. Santa Monica learned a lesson. You can't run three candidates against someone who's from the outside because everyone else votes for someone else but for someone from Santa Monica. But I ended up coming in second in Santa Monica, so that's really good. So the legislature, I did teach 8th grade civics, the Constitution, how a bill becomes law. I took 8th graders to the Capitol. So I won this upset primary in March. I taught through the primary. You don't have the option of taking weeks off to campaign when you're teaching. Right. Who pays for that, right?
Right.
And then the day after the primary, I'm back in the classroom, taught through June. And then it was a Democratic district, so it was a really good chance I was going to win in November. So I collected some personal things in one bag, left everything else, applied for a leave of absence in the fall to campaign and ended up winning. So it was, it's sort of like a Mrs. Smith, but my maiden name was Jones, so maybe it was Mrs. Jones Goes to Sacramento or something.
And what were the financial requirements to run then?
Then I ran and won the primary, which was all about the primary, because it wasn't a top two. Otherwise, that would have been a harder one.
Right.
Two Democrats in a split, is a solid. This was a district then that was heavily West Side.
And that's since changed.
More liberal, yes.
Yeah.
Now it's a swing district. So I raised $100,000. And here's, I don't know if you want to hear the story, but it's sort of an entertaining one.
Yeah.
So my biggest contributor were the Eagles. I don't personally know them. Well, I do know two of them.
How did that come about?
This is a weird story in life. So Terry Tamminen, who I met through a friend, a person I was on the Coastal Commission, said you should meet Terry Tamminen. Now he was involved with Santa Monica Baykeepers, something like that, local environmental group. And he said, I want to help. Didn't like the other candidates running.
And just for those who are listening, Terry went on to become Secretary of Cal EPA under Schwarzenegger.
This is where the whole life thing gets connected. And so Terry said, I have a friend who lives in Malibu. I'll have them do sort of a meet and greet fundraiser for you. Well, I come. There's only 10 people there. I thought, I have to talk to 500,000 voters, and I'm spending 2 hours. Nice home with the ocean view in Malibu. It turned out to be like the publicists that worked for Barbara Streisand or Don Henley. That was sort of my big base, because back then you didn't have a limit on what you could contribute to. Right. So you get $10,000 from Don Henley, and then Glenn Fry and some of the others. And then back then, which was the fire department supported me, so I had money from fire, and CTA teachers, $10,000. My husband gambled with our savings, and he threw in $20,000. And I remember when it was primary night, it's like 1 a.m, and people were still waiting at the local community center out in the Agoura Hills area. And you watch the votes come in, and people were literally jumping 3 feet out when you realized I was competitive in Santa Monica. And then the San Fernando Valley in my area came in, and I was like, so I ended up in first place. But that was pretty exciting, because that was really the grassroots thing. Bob Hertzberg, who was speaker at the time, couldn't believe I could win that. They were very concerned I could win in November.
Yeah, but you won handily in November. Mm-hmm. So
I was from the Valley, who always feels disrespected from the West Side.
Yeah.
And so the Daily News, which is a conservative paper, I had strong editorial support in all the local papers. I think they liked a teacher who was maybe running for the right reasons, who wasn't really a politician. Even the LA Times, that's always been their consistent reason. I think I've got their editorial support in the Ventura County Star since I taught in Moore Park. And I part of this district was in there, solid. So timing. I would say timing is everything. That last minute opportunity to run because Tom Hayden was going to do something else meant no one else already had $1 million in the bank. So I started off on a level playing field. Otherwise, the race would have been over before I started.
So you get to Sacramento, and as this really outsider in terms of the Democratic Party, and obviously a freshman assembly member, and within a few years, you emerge as this powerhouse on environmental issues. And we'll talk about some of your key bills that you authored that really have set the precedent for how California operates today in the climate and environmental sphere. Look, the legislature is a field of competitors and leaders.
Yep.
I was talking with one state senator last night who was sort of lamenting that he's, and I won't mention his name, but is sort of lamenting that he is lost in a field of other legislators. How did you emerge in this way from really a nobody, somebody who really didn't have the connections?
Nice middle class person,
right? A school teacher coming in. How do you sort of, maybe I'm characterizing it in the wrong way, but how do you fight your way through that field to become the leader that you became?
maybe, again, timing is everything, but I had some good advice from my predecessor, Sheila Kuehl, when I had this moment of panic, because my background and passions are in environment and education issues, right? And you realize, whoa, healthcare, insurance, I mean, all these other policies. And I said, I don't have any background in them. And she said, don't worry about it. Trust others who do. You focus on two or three things, topics that you're passionate about, stick with them, make a difference. 14 years later, I could say mission accomplished. The disappointment's been in education, because that was probably the number one reason I was running, and the environment, a passion. But I didn't know where I was going other than wanting to champion air and water quality on it. And I was on the education committee, and I was appointed the chair of the budget subcommittee that has overview of all the environmental agencies. So those first bills sort of came, my first bills were a state poet laureate who would do more time with incentivizing the love of poetry in high schools.
That warms my heart. I'm a huge poetry fan,
so my first bills were the
myself.
State Poet Laureate with Kevin Starr doing quotes and hearings with me, and then these two gentlemen came into my office, Tim Carmichael with the Coalition of Clean Air and Russell Long with the Blue Water Network, a small nonprofit in the San Francisco Bay Area, with this crazy idea of greenhouse gas emissions from the tailpipe from automobiles. I'm pretty sure they shopped it to all the seasoned legislators who were smart enough to say,
that's too hot to touch.
Yeah.
Literally.
You can anger all the car dealers, the automobile manufacturers, and the oil companies. And I said, sure, because my background, anything to reduce emissions, and I got it, obviously, if you're taking out greenhouse gas emissions and pollution from tailpipes of automobiles, you're also taking out criteria air pollutants. So it all worked together. Those early bills were quite something. It took me 2 years to get AB 1493 out. And the hidden secret, it was AB 1058 up till the last minute. And there was so much opposition to the bill, and full-page ads, commercials on TV, and death threats in my office. It just, it was so hot politically. Everyone thought it could never pass. So John Burton, who adopted the bill and took no credit for it. I'm a freshman assembly member. I'm over in strategizing with John Burton in the state Senate, who's, as the other members of the Senate told me, he told us we're all voting for the bill or staying off. He told Labor, support it, don't oppose it, or I'm done with it. I mean, this was the old, sitting there.
So he put his...
And I heard a lot of four-letter words, which wasn't allowed in my classroom, but I tried to overlook it. So what he did, because of the opposition being so strong, and John and Ken on the conservative talk show radio telling everyone every afternoon, like 3 to 5, call your legislator's office, tell them not to vote for this bill. They'll take away the car you want to drive, it'll cost more, the list goes on, and they're unsafe. Same comments as today. John Burton one day decided to take the contents of AB 1058 and dump it into a different number, Assembly Bill 1493. All the advertising. So people are all calling up.
Crafty.
Yeah.
Very crafty.
Vote no one, 1058. So legislators could go, okay. And there were a lot of interesting discussions that were really helpful to me. I personally met during the year, it's a 2-year bill, so personally met with key people in the state on why this was relevant to them. You know, environmental bill, and you're going to make powerful people angry. You better be able to talk about it in a way that matters to them and their constituents. I remember talking to several, and several are in Congress now. And they were quite candid, you know, where are those environmental communities when we need them? This is before we called it environmental justice and issues like that. And being a good listener, finding ways to work with people, listen to them, and respect those differences. they eventually were all on board. The Latino caucus, led by Martha Escudia and people back then, they invited me to come address the Latino caucus on this issue. Turns out I was the only person ever asked that wasn't Latino to speak at Latino. And they were all, by the time that first year finished, the behind-the-scenes work, they were all co-authors on this bill. So you had this nice cross-section of not just your, what we now call the coastal elitists, really supporting a bill that also related to healthcare, health outcomes, asthma rates, to their constituents too.
And now, a word from our sponsor. A special thanks to our sustainable business sponsor for the California Leadership Series, Lyft. Lyft is the fastest growing rideshare company in the U.S. and is available to 95% of the U.S. population. Now, all Lyft rides are carbon neutral. This means that a decision to ride with Lyft is a decision to take a cleaner option, cleaner than driving yourself or riding with another company, and will fund efforts that are reducing emissions and combating climate change. This is a multi-million-dollar investment in the first year alone, which makes Lyft one of the top voluntary purchasers of carbon offsets in the world. In year one, Lyft anticipates offsetting over 1 million tons of carbon, equivalent to planting tens of millions of trees or taking hundreds of thousands of cars off the road. Lyft's investment and impact will continue to grow as the company does. Ride Lyft and join together in effecting positive change for the future of our cities. To learn more, visit lyft.com/carbon. I didn't realize that in getting 1493 through, you were able to work with what we now call the environmental justice community. And since then, there has been sort of a rift around climate issues between some of those constituents that is now being mended in some ways. When did that rift sort of happen? When did it become sort of clear that, at least to some, that climate change was an elitist issue and was sort of ignoring people in communities that were close to some of these polluters?
I want to back up just 1 minute and talk about that air quality was number one, which is the link. If you look at any polls, PPIC polls every year, that is what people care about the most than water quality. So that was critically important. But I realized I could never pass a bill like this unless I made it about things people cared about personally. Global climate change is one thing, but what matters to you and your constituents every day, right? And then it was about me was sort of working in the background in building a coalition because environmental groups were never going to pass this by themselves. Sally Bingham and the interfaith community, amazing. Every church and synagogue had their sermons. I got ministers' sermons sent to me that they were giving on Sundays or speaking at Shabbat services on Fridays in synagogues all over the place. They were incredibly important and different messengers. 41st vote on the tailpipe bill was done by a priest who visited a legislator in his home, talking to him and his wife about the moral responsibility of caring for the planet. That was my 41st vote. So the takeaway was, and E2, this was the first bill that they ever lobbied on. A business space in the Capitol. Bob Epstein tells me the story. That's the first time he'd been to the Capitol since he was 10 years old. I had no idea. I'm a freshman. That these people have no idea.
Right.
But it was the coalition. It was also incredibly important behind the scenes. So you couldn't just carry this with an environmental voice. You had to be smarter than that. So that's probably my strength is I can be a good listener, but also build some coalitions because every legislator has different priorities that are important to them, and you better make that about.
And it's about listening, and it's about reaching
listening,
out into the
and no
grassroots.
egos. And sometimes you get your bills sort of stolen or moved around, or you have to defend them because you get into that political world. Climate change got very popular politically several years later, right? And so everyone carried it. So we didn't articulate the environmental justice issues very well back then. But air quality was the bridge that connected us.
And just staying on the Clean Cars bill for a second, which is also known as the Pavley bill, and which went on to inform the Obama administration's vehicle standards that are now being threatened to be rolled back by the Trump administration. What's your understanding of the level of safety or defensibility of the bill in California now?
Well, we were given that waiver authority in the Federal Clean Air Act. It's actually in statute, approved by Congress, voted on by Congress. In addition, the Massachusetts versus EPA Supreme Court decision, 5-4, Kennedy was the fifth vote, was incredibly helpful too, because they recognized that not only criteria air pollutants, but greenhouse gas emissions were subject to the authority of the Environmental Protection Agency. So this wasn't just an MOU.
Right.
And so
it has some layers of protection.
I'm not a lawyer, but you would think, of course, it'll be litigated, but other states, 18 other states are now defending California's rights. States sort of stick together on these kinds of issues. And it's always been other states could join California if they wanted to. They weren't required to. And they support that policy. And at the end of the day, I think when I talk to people about just the subject matter of the bill, and we don't get into the partisan politics, and we don't get into, you can discuss climate change if you want to, but some audiences, that's not the point. But would you like a broader choice of vehicles you can buy? One that cleans up the air, reduces greenhouse gas emissions, and saves you money at the pump? People really don't like the monopoly that the oil companies have in the fuel sector. You can go into any room and sell that one. And so, anyway, back to the environmental justice issues. You need a constant communication. One of the challenges in the legislature had been term limits. We forget about that. Everyone who maybe supported one bill, by the time I started in the Senate, there wasn't one person in the Assembly that voted for the car bill or AB 32. I mean, you take for granted. Lobbyists really realize, but you have a learning curve here too. There's been better organization in environmental justice communities to bring things to the attention of legislators, and legislators are carrying their message. I think that's been incredibly helpful. You need passionate people to represent your communities. And if you're only paying attention to Sacramento politics, maybe you're not voicing that as a priority on behalf of your constituents. So local governments and organizational efforts have really, really increased. I had a really enjoyable time carrying my last bill, SB 32, the extension of AB 32 to 2030 targets. It was jointly combined with Eduardo Garcia's Bill 197 that looked at equity and environmental justice issues and multi-benefits. And these bills were all about multi-benefits to begin with. He was a great person to work with, but we could join those bills. So if mine didn't pass, his didn't pass. And so you saw the politics of trying to kill one of the bills because you could take them both down at the same time. He was great to work with. He's passionate, one believes in, but he's pragmatic. And he's a good team player, good listener, good staff.
So talk to me about that trajectory of AB 32, SB 32. This is the Global Warming Solutions Act, originally of 2006, that really secured your reputation as being the mother of climate policy in California. and set the groundwork for what became the cap and trade program and our overall increasingly aggressive carbon reduction mandates.
And that's a good question because it'll tie in with remind me on environmental justice and cap and trade. So AB 32, Governor Schwarzenegger went in a recall. I had this moment of panic where I think, all the climate stuff is dead. Terry Tamminen, back to Terry Tamminen, my friend, helped me with my assembly race, becomes the new head of Cal EPA. This is his priority too. They were involved in, I had introduced AB 32 in December of 2014, starting with the premise of mandatory reporting for all the major emitters so we can measure baselines. There had been a voluntary effort. There was no business objecting to that. We were always going to expand it somehow to a multi-sector approach. We're well on our way regarding tailpipe emissions. Let's look at other things. And so right here in San Francisco, Governor Schwarzenegger, because Terry Tamminen set this all up, participated in World Environment Day of June of 2015 with executive orders. And as a legislator, I'm not a fan of executive orders because they can change anytime a governor changes or even gets pressured to make changes in it. There's nothing really firm in statute, and they're sometimes not enforceable. So Schwarzenegger signed on World Environment Day in San Francisco his midterm and long-term targets for greenhouse gas emissions reductions with his famous quote, "The debate is over. Climate change is real." His midterm targets were what was in AB 32. It was, the reduction to 1990 levels by 2020.
Which we've already surpassed.
We've already surpassed.
2017.
And in a small world story, I'm working at the USC Schwarzenegger Institute on a grant from the DiCaprio Foundation, and Terry Tammen's the CEO there. So just sort of...
It all comes full circle.
All comes. Yeah. And there's a lot of other stories too, but that's what we put in AB 32. Administration didn't want it in AB 32. Most governors, we had just gone through the deregulation crisis, most governors prefer executive orders. They prefer it be them and the agencies.
Because they have more control over it?
Right. Mm-hmm. Legislators are dangerous. You have 120 opinions.
Right.
And your favorite issue may be tweaked or... And so it took about 9 months or so, and I got a call from Governor Schwarzenegger at home saying, I think I'm okay with those AB 32. You should be, Governor. It's your midterm targets. Right. And so that was a multi-sector approach, right? Mm-hmm. So it had the tailpipe bill. I tried to remind people AB 32 didn't start from nothing. 70% of it was already done. Mm-hmm. CEC's appliance and building standards were a huge amount. We had already passed a bill in 2002 on a renewable portfolio standard for renewable energy that the PUC was operating on. That's part of it. Those are the three major components, right? And so there were other things that were gradually added, low carbon fuel standards and others, but what was not part of it, and this is where the governor Schwarzenegger, who has a business background, really supported having a market-based approach. Mm-hmm. And we had a big argument of whether AB 32 should say shall have or gave the authority to CARB to have that. And I supported the giving the authority to CARB, provided they have a lot of these stakeholder meetings. I don't think 5 people in the room should make a determination. We had looked at Europe. Those weren't going so well. Right. And so...
was there a debate at the time whether it should be a market-based solution versus a tax?
Yes. We lost Sierra Club support over that, not versus tax, but a lot of environmental people. Actually, CARB has an incredible history of doing well on a straight regulatory approach. Command and control, right? Enforcement, fines if you don't. And the argument would be, why would we provide that flexibility to major emitters? first of all, votes count. But also, was interesting to me, the people that were coming to talk to me about AB 32 weren't the environmental groups anymore. I was invited to San Francisco. It was like the head of DuPont, Alcoa, you name it, and big national companies, because they wanted California to model a market-based solution, because they thought AB 32 was just going to be the model for the federal government. They were going to process.
And it almost was.
In the next year or two.
It almost was.
And so isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
So I'm the middle school teacher, with the environmental background. And people like Bob Epstein could explain things easily enough to me, which I try to translate to the public. That's what I'm good at. I can put complicated things in ways that people can understand and realize who the audience is there. He said, this cap and trade, when businesses, you're going to encourage businesses not just to meet these reduction targets, you're going to encourage them to do more, because this has value. You're putting a price on carbon, and they will exceed it and then be able to trade these credits. So he could prove how you would actually have greater reductions, providing this flexibility to it. People will meet and exceed those. And those that can't, they have two choices. They can try to reduce their emissions, and if they can't, they have to buy allowances. I call it permission to pollute. That was and still is today, somewhat of the controversial part of it.
Exactly.
I would suggest to you a lot of it is on criteria air pollutants, which, frankly, CARB could enforce under their other authorities. But all these issues have come into this one house of carbon emissions, cap and trade, but there's actually separate authorities, regulatory on the criteria air pollutants. There's no way refineries should be across the street from homes and schools. And that's local government too. So it's been successful. Could it be better? Yes. Do we need a broader region? When I talk to people like Eduardo Garcia and things, when they found out that to reduce emissions, we were involved in other states and other countries, that there was a big shift then when they realized that. They thought, yes, it may make sense to buy rainforests in South America or Mexico for carbon sequestration and everything, but there's so much need for people, even in California. We're big, 40 million people, right? There's needs here. And so that was the shift with the environmental justice community, understanding what it was, but then really focusing the expenditure, the cap and trade allowances to provide multiple benefits. And it's now the majority is in disadvantaged communities, whether it's in transit, energy efficiency. Energy efficiency, I think we need to do more. That's existing building structures.
What do you see looking forward now? And now we have, obviously, your second edition of AB 32, as you discussed, was SB 32 and AB 197 package that recalibrated and made more aggressive targets, 40% reduction by 2030, and that was passed in 2016. And just 2 days ago, Governor Brown signed SB 100, which sets a clean energy, which is a little bit different than 100% renewable, but a clean energy target of 100% clean energy by 2045. What does this unlock in terms of job opportunities for people? Where you mentioned energy efficiency, what sectors do you see growing the most to meet those targets?
And we're talking about in-state jobs because that's really important. So in energy efficiency and renewable energy, the amount of jobs that have been created here are quite amazing. And you don't always need a college degree for them either. Over 500,000 people now are in that space of energy efficiency or renewable energy. And what's fascinating to me, it's in all parts of the state. This is not all Silicon Valley benefiting from our climate policies. You're seeing jobs in Fresno or Riverside County, all over the state. And I think people are realizing renewable energy. When all these bills started passing, the 20%, then the 30%, 33%, 50%, now it's 100%. Solar companies will tell me, they said, we came to California and we opened business because of these policies. And they have succeeded. And the surprise factor to me was, okay, will the cost be higher to coal? Because someone's going to bear that cost. We're always challenged by the media and others on, won't the cost it'll be too expensive. The drop in price on photovoltaics was amazing. Maybe it's market forces, I suppose. So it's competitively priced. It's homegrown, which is someone who, my first year in office was the energy deregulation nightmare. That was January and February, my first 2 months in office. So that was probably clouded my eyes. So I'm very big on trying to control your own economic destiny here and clean up the air and provide jobs. So we're starting to see people transitioning into these fields, diverse workforce. My last few years in the legislature, employees for some of the solar companies or wind companies reflect the diversity of California. It's really been quite a success story. So the biggest challenge in the future, and something I'm looking forward to working on, is how we really scale up energy storage. That's our, and that too can provide some job opportunities. There isn't a college in California now that isn't offering a sustainability major.
That's incredible.
It really is incredible.
Yeah.
Because
that didn't exist just a few years ago.
I was at USC teaching a class, master's degree program in business, and I'm thinking, they're going to question all this stuff. They were on board from the beginning. They were debating with me whether private companies should be doing the charging stations or shouldn't it be the investor-owned utilities or the LADWP doing it, because how could average people ever have access to charger unless it's provided through the rate structure and broad group? So I'm just surprised whether they're going into the private sector or the public sector jobs. That younger generation just is an important issue. The word sustainability wasn't even coming out of people's mouths 15 years ago. Isn't that amazing? Yeah. It's just smart. Yeah. And actually, it's conservative values.
Yeah. So you are, as you mentioned, you are now back with Terry Tamminen and Governor Schwarzenegger at the Schwarzenegger Institute.
Can't get rid of them.
Tell me what you're up to there.
I would say it's a work in progress, but one of the things we've been working on, especially with the national government at this moment, is former Governor Schwarzenegger has made working with subnationals really important. And he and Terry started, I think, from Copenhagen, the R20 group. They're still engaged. Big summit in Vienna every year. Cities and some countries working together, recommitting, making reducing climate pollution a top priority. It's been extraordinarily helpful in keeping on board. So Governor Schwarzenegger's interest in subnationals is how can we work with other states and provide some information that maybe we learned from California, or even better yet, let's find out what is going on in other states. So if you go to envirolaws.com, it's a digital legislative handbook for legislators or the NGOs or the agencies in these different states to look at some of these laws that have passed. They have to be laws that have passed, not just great ideas, and see if they can be tweaked or work in their state. And we're finding lots of policies that can be adapted. I'm working right now with a representative from the state of Washington on low carbon fuels. Oregon already has it. Wouldn't it be great if British Columbia to California?
Is this part of the Pacific Coast Collaborative? Or
indirectly, but it's that same concept, build. What I've learned from other states, though, we're incredibly fortunate in California We have a full-time legislator. I could spend every day for 14 years on these subjects, right? Mm-hmm. With full staff. I'm finding in other states, they maybe meet every other year, and their staff is a scheduler.
It's quite a bit different in terms of their ability to focus.
Our agencies, I can write a 10-page bill and say to the Air Resources Board or the CEC or the PUC, okay, you guys, you implement it. Let me know how it turns out. I'll provide oversight and have hearings, but we have the top experts on the planet. We really are in a special place.
So maybe to close on, you've seen and driven tremendous progress in California. But here we are. We're sort of not alone among states, but we're in a country that whose federal government is not only a vacuum of climate policy, but retrograde in climate policy. You have spent time internationally, and you know the state of play internationally. And here we are in California with great policy and good implementation. We're also experiencing these effects of climate change already much more quickly than we thought we would. Are you optimistic?
I'm just an optimist by nature, I think. I mean, you can get so depressed on so many things going on in the world right now. You just forge ahead and try to figure out how you can make what you're working on relevant in other states and a priority for them. That was good practice here in California, because people think of California as all one, all very liberal, all very environmental. Not at all. Inland California is a far different world than coastal California as far as priorities. Rural versus urban is probably even a bigger difference. So I'm optimist, even though the thought of methane leaks in Aliso Canyon, which was in my district, and wildfires like we've never seen before. We went through in my area 3 weeks of over 105 degrees, where all the oaks are singed and rust-colored, burnt in the Santa Monica Mountains, because they never had that. And it was the nighttime temperatures that were the most alarming to me, 75, 78. So if you didn't have air conditioning, that was actually a very dangerous heat episode. So wildfires in Ventura and Santa Barbara and loss of subdivisions. These are not people, rural area living out on a windy road in the middle of nowhere. These are huge tracts of subdivisions. So on a strictly emission sense, we probably went backwards this year.
Yeah.
Especially black carbon and methane, very strong pollutants. And mobile sources is growing. Not despite what we do, work very hard to get people out of their cars. The City of Los Angeles has just announced their roadmap to 2028, trying to come up with an all-electric kind of platform for their city to time it with the Olympics. So there's a lot of interest on the local level. That gives me hope and optimism. California, it's not just people like me carrying these bills now. That's a good thing, right? It reflects the diversity of California that can only have good outcomes. So we continue to do that, and I try to work with other states, but I'm so sensitive to people not wanting to either be like California or they can't be like California. They don't have the agencies. They don't have what we have here as far as resources and things. So you try to find ways, cost-effective strategies that would make sense politically, but also economically for those states. So we're going to need a strong national policy. We thought we had it back in 2006.
Well, we can hope. And, thanks to the work that you've done here, other states and countries can use this work sort of as R&D that they don't have to invest in.
That is a good ending in that was my takeaway and surprise from Sacramento. Hardly a week went by that we didn't have a foreign flag flying in the floor of the state Senate. People come from all over the world. I'm not talking about tourists. come to California to learn about these policies. We are providing the R&D to them. It was brought home to me one day when this man from China was sitting next to me, and I said, how come you're coming to California? And he said, you have to realize that we wouldn't have catalytic converters today in China if it wasn't for California. So the role we play on the global scale with these new technologies, being the incubator of new technologies, incredibly important. That's probably the most important thing we do. And we have buying power in our state to help drive down costs.
Well, Senator Pavley, thank you for a remarkable career in public service.
It's not over.
All the work that you continue to do.
I keep getting these Lifetime Achievement Awards. It's like, stop.
It ain't over yet.
It ain't over. Well,
thank you.
Yeah, thanks, David.
Thanks again to the Sustainable Business Partner for the California Leadership Series, LIFT. To learn more about LIFT's carbon neutral program, visit lift.com/carbon. The Sustainability Leaders Podcast is a resource of Jobs with Impact. Our engineer and associate producer is Ian Swanke. Theme music is also by Ian Swanke. I'm David Rosenheim. If you like the show, please rate and review us on iTunes or your preferred platform. And be sure to tell your friends and colleagues who want to make a difference. Thanks for listening. See you next week.